Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. I want to start out with the definition of genocide. So genocide is commonly defined as the deliberate killing of a large group of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying or eliminating or exterminating that group of people. So it's the deliberate killing of a large group of people from a particular ethnic group or nation with the intent or with the aim of exterminating, annihilating, destroying, or removing that group of people from existence. And when we talk about with the intent, sometimes intent is not something that's easily measured, right? But there are certain outcomes that there's a direct correlation between them, behaviors. There are certain behaviors and certain acts that there's a direct correlation between them and certain outcomes. So if there are certain acts which can only result in the killing of a large group of people, and somebody does that on purpose, then we can basically conclude that they had intent. If they knowingly engage in those acts, then we can say they had intent, right? So let's look at some of the acts that would qualify. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm overstepping or I'm saying something incorrect, you can correct me. So let's say, for example, that a group of people, a nation, they bombed or did a series of missile strikes that targeted civilians, large concentrated areas of civilians. And they did this for days on end. So there's densely populated areas, you drop bombs on those areas, and you send missiles into those areas where civilians live, densely populated areas, and you do that for an extended period of time. And along with those densely populated areas, you target soft targets like hospitals and schools and mosques and things like that. I don't know, what's the likely outcome? Just what's the likely outcome if you do that? If you drop bombs and send missiles day after day after day, yeah, you're going to kill everybody there, right? And if you flippantly say, oh, well, some of the people there were militants, would that change the expected outcome? That there's going to be lots of civilians who are not militants or people who at least we can't prove one way or the other that are going to be killed. Is that right? Tayyib, give you another example. Suppose a group of people, they destroyed medical facilities, hospitals and clinics. And also they intentionally killed competent physicians, either through assassinations or they were expected to be in that hospital and that hospital was bombed. And so as a consequence, when you lose the facilities to provide care and the competent physicians to provide care, those who are injured in these bombings are not going to get what? The care that they need. And likely injuries that could have been treated will go untreated and cause death. That's the likely outcome. Tell me if I'm like way off base, okay? And what if they had treatable diseases? Like COVID. COVID can be treated, right? Or they had other treatable diseases like diabetes, hypertension. But because there's no hospitals and there's no clinics and there's no medicine and there's no qualified physicians, if these diseases go untreated, what's the likely outcome? People will die from them even though they're treatable diseases. Like, all right, give you another example. Suppose you destroy plants that supply essential resources like drinking water. You target these plants and you destroy them. And so the people who are depending, hundreds of thousands of people who are depending upon the water supplied by this plant, drinking water, will not have drinking water. If you don't have drinking water or water that's suitable to drink, what will happen to you? You'll die. That's the likely outcome, right? Can man survive without water? H2O? No, can't do it, right? Suppose while all this is going on, you impose blockades. And those blockades prevent the free movement of people and the free movement of goods and also the free movement and supply of humanitarian aid. So people have been bombed, right? And medicine that they need is not available. Food that they need is not available. Drinking water that they need is not available. And they can't move around to what? To go to other areas to get these things. What's the likely outcome? Yeah. And if there's certain humanitarian aid that they need, people who could come in and bring these things, if they're prevented from doing that, the likely outcome is what? Is death, right? What about forced evictions? You go to people's home, you come armed to the teeth, and you tell them, get out or we'll kill you. So those people, when they're kicked out of their homes, they have to live in the streets. Is that not so? I'm going to ask you, a person who lives without shelter, does that make it difficult for them to survive? And if they're living in a war zone, that makes it even more difficult to survive. And the likely outcome for people like that is death. Is that not so? And then last but not least, if people are just arbitrarily detained and tortured while they're detained, and they're tortured and detained with impunity, there's no one who will hold them accountable and make sure that the human rights of these people who they've detained are maintained. The outcome of that could also be what? And nobody would know about it, right? Because there's no one to hold them accountable. So if you look at all of these examples, not just one of these examples is enough to kill people en masse. What if you had all of these going on at one time? Wouldn't it be proper if all that was going on at one time, in one place, targeting one group of people, killing large swaths of that people? Wouldn't it be fair to say, if we use the dictionary definition of genocide, to call it a genocide? Okay. I'm not crazy. So why, if this is going on right now, and we all know about it, why isn't it called a genocide? Because we live in a country where the tail wags the dog. And in spite of the fact that this country gives billions of dollars of aid to the people who are doing this, which should give them the leverage to say, hey, stop doing this, or we'll stop what? Giving you aid. We're not going to be complicit in this. We're not going to somehow seem to be like we're financing this. If they don't do that, and they don't do it because there's a small, powerful minority which controls the media, controls the economy, and controls the politics of the country, then that's what? That's a country where the tail wags the dog, to the point that when these people commit these types of crimes, which are called war crimes in Ukraine, when the exact same things or worse are committed in this particular country, this particular nation, and people go to the United Nations and decry what they're doing and say these people should be sanctioned, they're guilty of war crimes. This nation, the dog, being wagged by the tail, will veto those statements or those amendments or whatever you want to call them in the United Nations. So this power that this group has allows them to do a few things. One is to intimidate. The first one is to gaslight, to tell you you're not seeing what you're seeing. This is not genocide. It allows them to do that. And many people are afraid to call it what it is for another reason, because the power that they wield gives them another reason or ability to keep people from calling it what it is. And that is the fear of being labeled with a 2-letter hyphenated phrase that everybody's scared of being called, right? I believe they call it anti-Semite or anti-Semitic. People are afraid of that, being labeled as that. And so as a consequence, they won't what? They won't call a spade a spade. They won't call genocide. But it's important for us as Muslims, wa alaikum salam, it's important for us as Muslims not to be deterred by this, not to be deterred by the fact that we're being told by this very powerful minority that we're not seeing what we're seeing. Or this powerful minority, the fear that they will call us anti-Semites, that should not deter us Muslims from coming to the defense of the Palestinians in occupied Palestine. As we have in the hadith collected by Muslim on the authority of Abu Sa'id, in which he said that the Prophet said, من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فلم يستطيع فبلسانه فلم يستطيع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان. He said, whoever amongst you sees a wrong being committed, you see some people who are doing the wrong thing, then you should put a stop to it with your hands. You should physically put a stop to it, if you're able. فلم يستطيع. If you can't do it, you're not able to do it. You don't own F-14s. You don't own, a missile system that could reach in that distance. You don't have that power. You don't have that ability. You don't own tanks, right? فَلَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. You say what it is. You say, this is what's happening and it's wrong. You say that. You have the courage to say that. Even if they call you an anti-Semite, even if they say you're crazy, you're not seeing what you're seeing. And CNN isn't saying that. And NBC isn't saying that. And MSNBC isn't saying that. Who are you to say that? Even though the human rights organizations across the world are saying that. The recognized incredible human rights organizations are saying it. They're saying it without fear. We can't be afraid. They can't be more courageous than we are, right? The other thing it's important for us to do as Muslims is to make dua for, at the very least, to make dua for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and to make dua against the people who are oppressing them, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't be ashamed of that or shy away from that, because the Prophet said in the hadith, da'wat al-madloom, right? He said, وَاتَّقِي دَعْوَةَ الْمَظْلُومِ فَإِنَّهُ لَيْسَ بَيْنَهَا وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ حِجَابٌ. He told Mu'adh, beware of the supplication of the one who's being oppressed, which means that the oppressed person has a right to make dua against his oppressor. And he has a right to expect it will be answered. And so we should be making dua for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. So for example, we could say, Allahumma ahsihim adada waqtulhum badada wa la tughadir minhum ahada. We could say, for example, oh Allah, enumerate them. Enumerate them. Take account of all the people who are doing these terrible things to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Slay them in a way that rips them to pieces. And do not spare a single one of them, right? We can make this prayer. I want to say one thing in closing before we get to our real subject. And that is that one of the things that you do see, and it's disturbing, is you see a certain level of apathy. Apathy is just like people who just seemingly don't care. In the Muslim community, people who don't care. One of the reasons for that is exhaustion. We're just seeing too much of this. We're just worn out. We're worn out from seeing this, and we don't know what to do, and we just would rather just bury our heads in the sand, not think about it. Act like it's not happening, and just wait till the day when they stop doing this. And we can just go back to a news cycle that doesn't show images, of little bodies and white shrouds spread out in the street. So I think part of it is just fatigue. People are just exhausted. Sure. So I think people just are exhausted. That's part of the apathy. But another part of the apathy, and this is very important for us to pay attention to, is the lack of mutual concern. I want you to really pay attention to this. Is that when we get in the habit of not caring about others, when bad things happen to them, they'll return the favor when bad things happen to us. And one of the problems we have in the Muslim community is that bad things happen to certain people who look a certain way and come from certain countries. And we just shrug. We just don't care. We don't care. And so when the shoe is on the other foot, those people tend to return the favor and just not care. And traditionally, certain people are marginalized. Wherever you go, whoever the players are involved, certain people just seem to always get pushed to the margins. and their issues and their concerns are just not given due consideration. And those people get tired of that, and in turn, they what? When things like this happen, they don't care. And so we have to understand that we are partly to blame for what we're seeing of apathy. We haven't cared enough for others, and so when the shoe is on the other foot, people don't care for us. I'll be very specific. African Americans, blacks, Africans, dark-skinned people, they experience this a lot in Muslim communities where they're just not heard. Brown people, people from certain less prominent countries in Asia. And I'll give you an example just to drive the point home, to show you that this is a real thing. I remember when I was studying in Indiana, I went for Salat al-Jumu'ah, and this was around the time where Safwat Mursi was overthrown. He was overthrown, and there was a lot of protesting, and people were getting killed in these protests. So the government was cracking down. The military had seized power, and they were cracking down on these protesters, and they were being very cruel and heartless and brutal in the tactics they were using to put down any type of resistance or counter-revolution or whatever. And so the khatib that week was Egyptian, and he talked in the khutbah about the situation in Egypt, and he also spoke afterwards calling on people to be compassionate, concerned, and so on for the plight of the Egyptians. And there was a brother probably from Bangladesh or one of the less prominent, Asian countries, brown countries, right? And he stood up while the guy was talking. I want to say it was during the khutbah itself, not the after khutbah part of it. And he said, I don't want to hear. In fact, I think he said, we don't want to hear about Egypt. And this was also the time when the situation for the people in Burma was at a fever pitch. I'm talking about people, you had these people from Burma who were considered the nationals. They were going to the homes of these people and burning them on top of them, burning them down on top of them. And the crisis was at its height. These people were homeless. They were fleeing from this oppression and torture, etc. All this was going on. So he said, we don't want to hear nothing about Egypt because we haven't heard anything about Burma. And this is what's happening to the Burmese. And he was just going down, the Rohingya, right? What's happening to them, right? He was just going down the list. And he said, we haven't heard one khutbah, right? And he said, you people don't care about us and what's happening to our people, so we don't care about what's happening to your people. And this just is a clear indication, practical indication of the type of apathy that comes when we don't have mutual concern. And the Prophet ﷺ warned us about this. He warned us against this. We're not supposed to behave like this. He said, مَثْلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, the likeness of the believers, فِي تَوَادِهِمْ وَتَرَحُمِهِمْ وَتَعَاطُفِهِمْ كَمَثَلِ الْجَسَدِ الْوَاحِدِ. The likeness of the true believers in terms of their mutual compassion, concern, fellow feeling, love for one another is the likeness of a single body. That's how they're supposed to be. We don't behave like that, and this is the result you get. People are just apathetic. Part of it's people are exhausted, but part of it's because we just haven't shown the empathy when it was their turn, and so now that it's our turn, it's a different story. And so this is for everyone to think about, because there's some Muslims who just are fanning their hands at what's going on. This is happening to the Arabs. So what? Because the Arabs haven't cared about, So we have to think about that. With that said,